So welcome to the NEA Big Read Door County. NEA Big Read is a program of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. Tonight, we are going to be having a program titled Literature with a Sense of Place. Before we get started with the program, there are a couple of housekeeping items that we all need to know. This program may touch on varying points of view, and we thank you for being open to hearing others' opinions and participating in intellectual freedom in a respectful manner. Please make sure you are muted at all times. We may mute you if we notice there is extra unneeded sound. Please use the chat feature to ask questions. We can't promise that all questions will be used during this session, but we thank you for your participation. This event includes closed captioning and live transcription. Please click the CC or closed caption symbol in your bottom toolbar, then click Show Subtitle. You will not be able to have chat and closed captioning enabled at the same time. Zoom toggles back and forth between those two functions. And this event will be available for viewing on doorcountyreads.org and on the library's YouTube channel. If you do not want to be recorded, please disable your webcam. And for those of you who like to hashtag, here's our hashtag. Hashtag NEA Big Read. Tonight, we have a wonderful presenter. Her name is Ann Moser, and she's the Senior Special Librarian in the Wisconsin Water Library at UW-Madison and Education Coordinator for the UW Sea Grant Institute. She manages Wisconsin's Water Library, a library whose mission is to collect and preserve library collections and provide library services in support of the UW Aquatic Sciences Center. Ann holds a BA degree in Spanish and Art History from Colby College in Waterville, Maine, and an MA degree in Library and Information Studies from UW-Madison. Ann is our favorite water librarian and has presented at several of our Door County Reads events and during summer library programs. It's a pleasure to have her with us tonight. So take it away, Ann.
All right, thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Tina. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much to Tina for that lovely introduction. I really want to say thank you to all of you for coming tonight. I'm very honored to be part of this program. Tina had asked me to participate a couple months ago. She mentioned a book, a fiction book on the Great Lakes, set in the Great Lakes. And of course, I immediately jumped at the chance. My library is a small science library at UW-Madison, so I don't have a lot of fiction materials, and nor do I do a lot of programming around fiction. So when Tina asked me what I wanted to talk about, I kind of thought about, I have knowledge and programming around the Great Lakes, and I thought, well, it might be interesting to explore this sense of place that the author evokes around her setting, around the Great Lakes. I went ahead and got the book and read it. I literally devoured it, I don't know, in a long weekend. And I have to say, I absolutely adored it. Let's see, Tina, my advancement of the slides is not working. I wondered if someone else, let me see if I can get it to go. There we go. So I loved this book. When I read all those different themes and they just got, she just knits them together in this amazing, amazing, amazing way. Comic books and theater and museums and objects and airports. I absolutely loved it. And I thought it was really a provocative book. And the fact that she could do this all around like art saving humanity, to me, it was just a really beautiful piece of fiction that I just really, I just adored. But I closed the book and I thought to myself, I really didn't see a sense of place. I didn't have this feeling that she evoked the Great Lakes. And so I immediately was like, oh, I'm kind of flummoxed on what we might talk about tonight. So in my typical way, I just put the book aside and I thought, well, I'll think about that later. And so when I thought about what I wanted to talk with you guys tonight about, I was thinking about this idea of place. So for our program that I work for, we do a lot of place-based education. So I'm an educator, a librarian, and so we place our education really in a student's where they stand, where they're living. And so I thought to myself, well, maybe I should think of place in a different way. And I began to think about the parts of the story that she writes in this narrative that's very much about this post-pandemic place, this post-pandemic world. For me, those parts of the book really spoke to me. And I think I might have been thinking about today in 2020 or now 2021. We're very, very much in a pandemic. Obviously, we are living through a pandemic, and on I think almost a year, very soon, on March 13th, I left my library and I didn't return. I didn't return until October, and I have been working from home. I completely set up a computer and I set up my work from home station. My husband is working at home. Just coincidentally, my children were there. This photograph is about 40 days into their 72-day visit during last spring. This I thought was really a good image that evokes the COVID, dealing with COVID. But they were home. So we suddenly had this amazing workplace with 4 different people, very noisy, a lot going on. But my home and my work were all kind of the same place. And so it was like, kind of a little crazy. So I kept thinking about place also in that I don't travel anymore. One of my hobbies is I love to go traveling. So now my children are back in their place. As a mom, I'm devastated that I can't visit them during COVID. So all of these ideas about place for me personally are front and center. And I just want to say pretty out loud and strongly that I am also in a privileged place. I have a very good job and a very nice home that I live in. And place for people living through a pandemic might not be the same. They may have housing insecurity, so their place for home is not secure. They might not know, they may get evicted. So as we discuss place in the book and we think about place in a pandemic, it's something that I'll revisit, and maybe we can talk a little bit more after I give my remarks. So we know that this pandemic that we're living through is going to hopefully sooner rather than later be gone. And so when I read the book and this place that she evokes in the book in 20 years post-pandemic, to me, I kept thinking, well, I wonder what our place, what we're going to be looking at in terms of place in 20 years. Our lives are so upended right now. We drive less, we don't fly as much, we don't go to restaurants. The society is just flipped around. And are there lessons that we can learn? We can read the story of this book and learn from the way that this author writes about a post-pandemic world. Are there lessons that we can learn from there? Are there lessons that we can look at society today and think about what is the place we want in 20 years? And for me, this is not only a personal interest, but a professional interest. So my job is about Great Lakes education. I do teaching and programming to help the next generation of Great Lakes leaders, the people that will take care of the Great Lakes. What can I learn from living through this pandemic that will enrich my experience, will create future leaders? We have a pandemic crisis. We obviously have a society with vulnerabilities. We also are facing a climate crisis. Are there lessons from today during this pandemic that we can think about that will help our decision making for the future. So it's just, for me, this was an area of the book in terms of place that really struck me. Now, this is maybe different from your experience, and please, if you have any ideas on this, go ahead and write it in the chat. I'd love to hear how this post-pandemic world kind of spoke to you as well. So before I read the book, I kind of read about some of the reviews, and place was described like wasteland and dystopia and post-apocalyptic. And honestly, if this was a book that was in the library, I probably would not have picked it up. But I have to say, my concept of place in this book really changed as I began to read it. In some ways, I'm talking to you through a computer. The idea of not having a screen in front of me all the time and being unplugged sounds kind of like utopia right now. The world in this book has become more wild. It has become, nature has begun to like invade all the spaces. There's this feeling of quiet for me. And now I have to acknowledge that I'm kind of ignoring the other wasteland aspects of her description of place. I have to say that, I do acknowledge, she mentions the heat and she mentions the decay and everything like that. So I have to say that, I'm kind of being a Pollyanna and being a little more positive in this situation, but it made me think a little bit about place a little bit differently, and just sort of thinking about the way her description of what the post-pandemic world looks like. Before we kind of indulge a little bit more in place, I just wanted to give a shout out of my program. I work for Wisconsin Sea Grant, and many people, especially in the state of Wisconsin, are familiar with the Land Grant University. We have also a Sea Grant University, and our program is about science serving America's coast. So we take science knowledge, science research, and we address the wicked problems that are happening along our coastlines. And we do this in 3 ways. We fund original research, and we do education and outreach. We do this around 4 focus areas. These are topical areas. The first 2 looking at, healthy coasts, looking at sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, probably aren't so surprising. I work in environmental literacy, so teaching about the Great Lakes. But we also have this lens of economy. We look to help communities with resilience, whether it's like infrastructure resilience or resilience of their economy, workforce development. We are funded by NOAA, so we receive funds from that program, and NOAA is within the Department of Commerce. So we always are looking through the lens of economy. And personally, in a personal note, I think that that's a really effective way, because I don't think we can make any environmental progress without also looking at the economy and the effect on the economy. We fund a lot of research. About 60% of our budget goes to research. And we do just like an NSF or an NIH, we do a call for proposals, and people, any college, university in the state can apply. It can be private or public, small or large, as long as you're in Wisconsin. And we, support grad students as well. And what's great about our research call is we set the priorities in Wisconsin. And then, of course, we have an international panel do the review, but it's driven by the needs of Wisconsinites. So it's an effective way, I think, to run a program. And then staff do education and outreach. So that's what brings me here tonight as a librarian, as an educator. Just like with Extension Service, we don't have it in every county, but we have extension people in different field offices around the coast. Those of you in Door County may have met Julia Nordic. She's a water quality specialist down in Green Bay. She interacts with Door County quite a bit. And our fisheries biologist, Titus Seilheimer down in Manitowoc, often works with Door County. He does a lot with the commercial fishers and some of the companies up here. And then we have other staff with other specialties around the state. So I want to return to our place in our incredible book. And we know that it's in the Great Lakes, of course, kind of focused in around Michigan. I always kind of, it's hard. It's the lower peninsula, the northern half of the lower peninsula, and also Canada. So I thought it might be fun to have an exploration of some of the geography that is mentioned in the book. And I like to do trivia. I don't like to compete at trivia, but I love putting trivia together. It's always an opportunity for me to learn and to come up with some fun questions and find some fun facts. So Tina mentioned that you guys are able to make some notes in the chat. So I'm going to encourage you to write some notes in the chat. As you know the answer to a trivia question, please go ahead and make a note of that. So we're going to get started. So please, I'm sad that I'm not there in Door County. I love Door County. We go every February. I'm just devastated. So let's try to have some fun with some online Zoom trivia. And hopefully you've read the book, but hopefully my clues are going to be pretty obvious. So we're going to start here, and I'm going to ask, does anybody know what the name of this Great Lakes city is? I'm hoping, I can't quite get to the chat up here, so I'm hoping that, oops, sorry about that. I'm hoping that you guys are seeing this and are able to write in the chat. For some reason, I'm unable to. Let me see if I can get the chat up here again.
Oh, someone said Toronto. 3 people.
Yes, it is Toronto. Thank you. Exactly. I'm hoping that that beautiful skyline is familiar. I would like to ask if there's anybody that knows what Great Lake the city of Toronto is on. Does anybody know? I'm wondering. It is in fact Lake Ontario. That's exactly right. And I hope this skyline may be familiar to you because that iconic tower, apparently that tower, the CN Tower in French, we'll say Tour CN, I think something like that. It's a pretty famous tower. It's pretty iconic in the view of the skyline. And it's for a long time, it was the world's largest, the tallest freestanding structure at about 1,815 feet. And I tried to find kind of a funny piece of, a funny piece of trivia, but I did find that they said that the glass floor of the observation tower can hold 35 moose. And I'm thinking that may have been just like some corny Canadian humor, but whatever. Okay, so next question. Can you name this Great Lakes feature? And as we know, I'm sorry, I'll just jump back to Toronto. That's featured quite heavily in the present day of the book where, and I won't say anything more, I'm sure most of you know.
Sleeping Bear Dunes.
Right, exactly. That is the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, part of the National Park Service. And I really highly recommend visiting this lakeshore. It's absolutely stunning. Not only the dune communities, but the plant communities up on top of the dunes are absolutely beautiful. It's a little bit west of Traverse City, which she talks about in her narrative. Now, I'm wondering if anybody knows what this is. I kind of have a personal connection to this image, and I'll explain that in a moment.
A Petoskey Stone?
Yes, that is a Petoskey Stone. And this is a fossilized coral, and it's found in the northern portion of the Lower Peninsula. Petoskey is a town near where it's commonly found. That term is named after an Ottawa tribal chief, a very beloved tribal chief. I'm going to mangle his name, but it was Petoskey or something like that. I apologize for my mispronunciation. And he was the son of a French fur trader and an Ottawa woman who became the tribal chief. And I'm a little salty about this because my mother-in-law was born in Detroit and has a cabin up in this area. And every year for 20 years, I looked and looked and looked for these stones and never found them, except at the gift store. So I was kind of bummed out about that. Now, here's one for you. This might be a little more challenging. Where are you likely to meet this gentleman? And I have to tell you that the badger shirt he is wearing is not a hint. This picture came without a shirt on it. So I asked my son-in-law, who's really good at Photoshop, to put a shirt on him. And he's French and he's married to my daughter from Wisconsin. He loves Wisconsin, so he had to put a badger on it. This is a little bit more of a challenge. She only mentions this location in the book a couple of times. Anybody have any guesses?
There are no guesses at this time, Anne.
Oh, so this is the town. It's called Kincardine, Ontario. Oh, good gravy. I can't remember. Oh, it flew out of my head where in the book this is mentioned. But as you can see, he's paddleboarding on Lake Huron and wearing a kilt. So this is one of these Scottish communities in Canada. And I tried to find some fun facts, but I did see that a lot of NHL hockey players are from this community. So another little connection to Canada. Okay, so here's a little science. Which two Great Lakes can be considered just one lake? I think this is kind of an interesting.
M&M say A and D, and Jared says Erie and Huron.
Oh, excellent, excellent, excellent choice. Well, whoever said A and D is right. So if I were a hydrologist, I would argue that this is one water body. These two, they're featured in the book, as you remember. These are two water bodies that are connected by the Straits of Mackinac, and the straits will cause the water levels to remain at an equilibrium. So most water systems, watershed like the Great Lakes, water travels in one direction and one is higher than the other. But that does not happen with Michigan and Huron. They're at the same water level. I looked into this idea is that, if I were a hydrologist, I want one lake name. And so I looked into could they change the name? And I found out that it's very difficult to change the name of something, a geographic name. Apparently, once it becomes standard knowledge, it's almost impossible. So when you think about this movement to try to change McKinley back to its name Denali, apparently the people that run the geographic names are very stubborn and are like, no. So that was kind of an interesting little piece of information I read about. I imagine you guys know this Great Lake engineering marvel. It's so beautiful if you've ever been on it. I'm wondering, Tina, are you seeing anything in the chat?
I see Mac Bridge in the chat.
Exactly. I love that you use their nickname, the Mackinac Bridge. And what's really funny about this, I'm really afraid of heights and I also don't like driving. But when I was looking up the Mackinac Bridge, the 5th longest suspension bridge in the world, I did find out that they have a 24/7 phone number that you can call. And if you are uneasy about going over the bridge, they will come with a driver and get you over to the other side, which I thought was kind of a really pretty clever idea. And for me, who's afraid of heights, that sounded like a great idea. So that's our trivia. I'm hoping that you're thinking of all the places in the book. We're living through this polar vortex this week, so I wanted to evoke the Great Lakes watershed in winter. And here is the state of Michigan. So that's kind of where our book is placed. So I just wanted to share some information about the Great Lakes because this is just an incredible watershed to give you a sense of a place around the Great Lakes. The story of the Great Lakes is so long. We had this Laurentide ice sheet covering actually covering a lot of North America. And about 14,000 years ago, it began to retreat. And about 4,000 years ago, we were left with this watershed. So so they're called the Laurentian Great Lakes because of the Laurentide ice sheet. And that ice sheet really did transform the geography of North America pretty dramatically. The Great Lakes are great in number of miles of coastline. My East Coast neighbors or East Coast relatives don't believe me, but we have more coastline than the Atlantic and the Pacific put together. And this, this is also aided by, if you didn't know, there are 35,000 islands in the Great Lakes watershed, which is pretty amazing, I think. But also just hopefully when you're a kid, 20% of the Earth's unfrozen surface water is found in our watershed. 90% of the US's fresh water. It's a very large geographic watershed, as you can tell from the lat long measurements. And just to remind ourselves, there's 2 countries covered, 8 states, 2 provinces, and 19 tribes. So pretty amazing watershed. I really like this image. It's really fun to explore the Great Lakes watershed in a different way. So there's a lot going on here, and I'll just start by looking over here at Lake Superior, starting at about 600 feet above sea level. And as the water droplet makes this way down all the way over here to the Atlantic Ocean, you can see where its voyage travels. It takes that water droplet about 2,212 miles in its journey. Let's see, some other kind of interesting things to note. So when the water droplet, in theory, enters the Lake Superior watershed up here, it takes, you're never going to believe this, about 320 years to make it all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. That's a pretty long time. And this is called residence time. It's a calculation that scientists make. And this is really important when we consider pollution and chemicals entering the watershed. In some of these lakes, they sit for a really long time. You'll notice our hydrologists somehow got their way here, where Huron and Michigan are placed over each other. Lake Erie is sometimes derisively called the wide spot in the river, is what they call it. It's the shallowest lake, but it's also the most productive. So most of our commercial fishing is happening in Lake Erie. It's probably, if you have a chance someday to go to fish fry, your fish would probably come from the Canadian side of Lake Erie. And here's our beautiful Niagara Falls. You can kind of see that big barrier. And then as it travels out to the Atlantic Ocean. So I bet you've never looked at the profile of a watershed before. There you go. Another thing that makes the Great Lakes so great are its people. And I said all of the different city countries and states and everything, but this does translate to 85 million people having some sort of access to the Great Lakes. So a lot of people are close to the Great Lakes, and the Great Lakes provides drinking water for a lot of people in the US and in Canada. And of course we have Wisconsin. This is a sad picture since they didn't make it to the Super Bowl. We could have really had a frozen tundra. But more than a third of the Wisconsin, so we have Lake Michigan and Lake Superior. A third of the population in Wisconsin live in the coastal communities along Lake Michigan, and more than 1.5 million people get their drinking water. Wisconsinites get their drinking water directly from Lake Michigan and Lake Superior. And so not only is it people, but it's the ecology, it's the habitats that have so much rich life in them. We have forests, we have dunes, we have wetland communities, we have marsh communities, and these are the home for so much flora and fauna. So we can think of coyote, moose, lynx, bobcat, elk. I mean, it's really rich. Amphibians, reptiles. We even have a rattlesnake that is native to the Great Lakes. And of course, many of us love birds. There's a whole huge group of birds, some of our favorites. And then about 170 species are found in the Great Lakes. Some are native and some are introduced species. And then just finally, kids love this. Like, what? Like, how can you call the Great Lakes a sea? But it's called the inland seas or the Sweetwater Seas. And this is important because the Great Lakes actually behave like an ocean. They affect the weather, so they can moderate the temperature. They can also increase rain and increase snow along the coast. So I imagine you guys are really familiar with lake effect snow. And they also have coastal currents and waves. So these are dangerous rip currents that often kill people. So these are the ways that they are very similar to our ocean systems. So let's return to our book, Station 11. And we've been talking about the Great Lakes and all of these places that we find our story. And so just to remember our trivia, many of these are covered in our trivia contest. And what I think is kind of interesting, and if you have ideas or anything, you can go ahead and throw it in the chat. But some questions about place for me that kind of came about is why the Great Lakes? Why did she have the traveling symphony cruising around Upper Michigan? I think it's really interesting. She is from British Columbia. And apparently had a visit to Michigan at one point, but it's kind of interesting that she chose that place. And why the lakes? Like, it seems like the troop stays very close to the lakes. Water, what is that about? And then how do the lakes like contribute to the survival of these travelers? So some kind of thoughts I was thinking about. So I wanted to share just a few other journey stories around the Great Lakes, because I think this narrative is amazing. It tells this journey of survival. It tells a journey, of bringing art for humanity's sake, which to me is really unique. There's many travel narratives. I think, Bill Bryce, and so many people come to mind when we think about travel narratives. I think her point of view is really unique. So I thought about that, and I tried to think of some unique point of views and purposes of travel narratives to kind of share with you. So these are stories of narratives that may be about exploration or discovery or self-discovery, or to create art or to raise awareness or whatever. And I do hope maybe you've brought your own one or two titles to share with the group as well. So please go ahead and put those in the chat if you have. So I love to bicycle. So the first book I'm going to mention is a bicycling book. This author, as soon as I saw this, I was like, oh, I have to have that. This author spent 4 summers traveling around the Great Lakes. And he wanted to do this to take in the stories that he felt that the lake told him. And what I really like about this narrative is he doesn't necessarily, a lot of travel narratives are like, oh, it's so beautiful, it's so great, I met all these wonderful people. I really like it because he contrasts both the beauty and the grandeur with sort of the underbelly. So when he talks about nature, sometimes he talks about how beautiful it is. And then other times he talks about places that really have decayed or suffered trauma or whatever. I like that. He does that also with the cities he visits. So some cities are really thriving, and some, the prosperity has like passed them by. And he interweaves his whole narrative with history. So you learn about discovery and the colonization and migration and exploitation. So I really like that, because sometimes when you travel, life looks perfect, but I feel like he does a really nice. So if you're interested in stories of place that kind of tell the full story, this might be an interesting title for you. Well, not everybody likes bikes, or not everybody wants to get on a bike, but a lot of people do like to put their boots on and go for a walk. And so I wanted to mention this book. I think because I look at her picture and I think I'm probably around the same age. I'm in my late 50s and I have a lot of years of work left, but I have a very meaningful job. And I know when I retire, I'm going to be looking for meaning. So is it going to be to walk 1,000 feet? I'm not sure. But this book is interesting because it really, it's a book of self-discovery and discovery. So she asks questions of herself, and sometimes she's with her family, sometimes she's by herself, but she begins as her journey goes on to talk about stories and questions about the lake. And I really like that she asks these questions of like how, you could tell how profound this voyage was for her and she's beginning to kind of explore, like, how do we maintain it? How do we, those questions about this fragile ecosystem really come to fore. So I think if you enjoy stories of self-discovery, this might be a really nice book for you. I love this next book. I have to be very editorial there. So occasionally there are books, travel narratives about creating art. And this one I cannot recommend enough. Kevin Miyazaki is a Milwaukee-based photographer. At least he was when he did this project. He's so amazing. And he was asked by the museum, Haggerty Museum, I think, at the Marquette University, to create an artwork that represented the importance of fresh water, Milwaukee being the city that it is. And so he grabbed his camera and he grabbed like a little portable studio and he took a trip around the perimeter of Lake Michigan. And what I love about it is he takes pictures of both people and he contrasts that with pictures about the lake. And he just evokes Lake Michigan in this really beautiful way. The people, he goes to all kinds of places. He took them on, at the beach or in people's backyards or wherever. He took pictures of residents. He took pictures of professionals. So he took pictures of fishers. He took pictures of surfers. He took pictures of activists, Native American activists, just the real gamut. I love this book. It's absolutely beautiful. And if you enjoy seeing how an artist views a journey, I really recommend this book a lot. Now, I am thrilled to share about the Mother Earth Water Walk. If you have not already heard about it, this was the first thing I thought about when I thought about what I wanted to tell you about other Great Lakes narratives. This is, I have a screenshot of the homepage, and it's the Mother Earth Water Walk. And I've asked to have these links put into the chat later on, so you don't have to write them right now. They'll go into the chat in a little bit. But there's a group of, there were 2 Anishinaabe grandmothers, as well as a group of other Anishinaabe adults that joined them. And they, back in 2003, they began this water walk around the Great Lakes. And the website has a lot of interesting articles and blog posts about their experiences and some interesting press. But this really is for them a journey of awareness. So, for them, this was an opportunity to raise awareness of the challenge of our Great Lakes. And they very, very, very deeply communicate how important water is to life. And they feel that it's a right, not a privilege. It should be something that we take care of. And so it's a beautiful representation of journey around the Great Lakes. And there are 2 children's books. I do a lot of work with children, so I get really excited. But there are 2 children's books that talk about the water walkers. The top one is The Water Walker. It's it's a story about one of the grandmothers. She's Nokomis, I think, Nokomis grandmother, Josephine Mandamin. She's one of the grandmothers that started the water walk, and it talks about her great love of Nibi. And it's written in both Ojibwe and English. And the illustrations, as you can see from the cover, are just amazing. The bottom book by Carol Trembath is also about the water walkers, and it is told from the perspective of the Ojibwe girl, assume that we see in the cover, and she tells the story of her relatives that take the water walk. So if you have children in your life, grandchildren in your life, or any, you want to buy a book for a library in the school library, this would be a wonderful book to share about stories about activism and to teach children about a Native American approach to thinking about water. They're really, really beautiful. Finally, I'm super psyched because I wanted to share this interesting story about a journey in science. So this is a story that just came out not that long ago. So we not only journey for fun, but we also journey for work. And this gentleman, Ron Mooney, he is a graduate student at the Center for Limnology. And his research is all about looking at the entry points of the tiny little streams and tributaries that go into Lake Michigan. And his job, his research project, was to look at the effects of nutrient contributions from these tiny streams. Like, do they lead to algal blooms? And so a lot of times when we examine the health of the lake, we're not considering these tiny little streams that enter into the water. And so that was what his research was. And he did it during COVID. And he published this journal article that I have here from the Proceeding of the National Academy of Sciences, a pretty prestigious journal. And then the blog post as well describes it. In the blog post, I love this. I love this. So the article said that he went with another scientist, that they were fueled by weak motel coffee and a glove box full of sugary snacks like Uncrustables and Twinkies, which I just thought, wow, I kind of I really get a sense of his voyage. So those are my other narratives about travel around the Great Lakes. Before I turn off my screen, I just want to say thank you very much for attending tonight and giving me an opportunity to kind of think about this post-pandemic world and journeying around the Great Lakes. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing. And so I'm hoping that I can see if anybody had any questions for me or would like to ask any questions now after my conversation with you.
And someone did share a book title here, At a Gate at the Stairs by Lori Moore.
Oh, I haven't read that. I'm going to write that down right now. A Gate at the Stairs. I love Lori Moore. She's wonderful. Did anyone have a different feeling about that post-pandemic world that she writes about? Then, I was thinking about work and, the lessons of it. Did anyone else have any feelings or thoughts that came to mind after reading the story? Anybody? Or not? A book always speaks to people in different ways.
I was curious about the fact that she mentions air conditioning as a miraculous thing. And my son was in a Boy Scout troop that camped all winter. So I don't think much about air conditioning so much as heating, especially right now.
Yeah, I was telling when this call started that my furnace broke on Sunday.
Address any of the cold weather or any of that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of curious. The one thing you reminded me, Laura, is when we think about what we might miss and not miss in a world like this post-pandemic that she describes. I was saying I found it idyllic, but then the moment that I don't have my phone, what would happen to me? And you kind of had a sense of that. I thought the author did a nice job of evoking that feeling of the people that could remember back some of these things. So that was kind of interesting. Any other thoughts on place? I'm happy to chit chat, or the Great Lakes, any other books that you might have read?
And why do you think people want to be part of the Great Lakes or be by the Great Lakes or visit the Great Lakes? What is it about the water?
There's new research, like health research, that's looking at our connection to water. They call it the blue mind. And, in fact, I think personally, I agree with that. When I was a kid, there was nothing better than sitting at the shore of Long Island Sound and looking at the water. I always thought of it in this romantic way, but I think like instinctually I was at the water side. And I think just people, they have emotional attachment to the Great Lakes. It's places they've recreated. It's so beautiful. Look at Newport Beach behind me. That's from one of our trips there. It really is truly one of the most beautiful places in the world. And it's so varied, and I think people need that connection to water. Maybe, you know, we can be all philosophical, but our bodies are 70% water. Maybe there's something biological that draws us to the Great Lakes. But, you know, if you go from one end of Lake Superior all the way to the other end, Ontario, it is so different on all the different Great Lakes. So they have different places to see and different, you know, it's not all the same. And maybe that's what draws people to its variety and, you know, all those things. So. Does anybody have any other Blue Mind experiences of connection to the Great Lakes? Yeah.
As a former naturalist at Newport, I just thank you for the shout out. There's one book that's really hard to get a hold of anymore, but it means a lot to me. It's Journeys in Green Places by Virginia Eifert.
Ooh, Journeys to, what was that?
Journeys in Green Places. And it's about Door County, and it talks about starts with geologic history and goes into the succession, the post-succession, and why we have what we have now, and the genetic background of all of those things. It features the Regis Sanctuary pretty solid.
Oh, beautiful. I'm going to check that out. I know I don't have
It's
that.
hard to get a hold of it. I don't think you can buy it on Amazon or anything anymore. The Door County libraries have it, of course.
Yeah,
I hope you didn't throw that one away. Or if you can give them all the Crossroads, because I can use as many copies as I can have.
Newport is such a beautiful place. Oh my gosh. Oh, really a gorgeous. I'm jealous that you were the naturalist there. What a beautiful place. That was one of the first places my husband and I went on vacation together. We went camping up there a long time ago.
Another of our attendees has mentioned for Great Lakes novels, any of Peter Guy's books set on the North Shore of Superior.
Yeah.
He was a past Door County Reads author, and his most recent book, Northernmost, is wonderful.
Oh, I haven't read that.
I haven't read it either.
I'm writing to check that out. Yeah, you can tell my world is nonfiction. When I came up with story, you know, I wouldn't have even thought of fiction books just because it's not the world that I love to read fiction, but for Great Lakes, I can't get beyond the nonfiction world, I guess. And there's a lot of really good books. I can share, there's a lot, you know, if you're interested, Door County Reads did The Death and Life of the Great Lakes. There's also some other ones. Peter Annan wrote The Water Wars. That's another really good examination of the Great Lakes in terms of its water supply and what happens with the Great Lakes Compact and things like that. So that's another really good book to read. Another book I might suggest too are the Walleye Wars, which is, you know, it's a little bit inland. It's the story about what happened when the tribes were doing their spearing. But that story is really relevant to the Great Lakes in general because of tribal hunting and gathering rights. That's also a really interesting connection to the Great Lakes in terms of the fisheries that are in there. So that might be another good one. I'm trying to think. My mind, of course, is blank at this moment because I've been thinking about the talk. Oh, Donald McLeod, History of Wickosan. Oh, great. Thank you, Laura. That sounds like a really good one, too. I had a feeling that you guys would be the wealth of knowledge about Door County titles. I was kind of counting on that. Anything else about Station 11 and the place that there's anything came to mind when I was chatting about it? Or we don't want to talk about pandemic anymore, perhaps. Excuse me. Well, I want to thank you guys for coming. Boy, I just really enjoyed having a chance to chat about this book. And thank you so much. And thank you to Tina for inviting me. I really I'm pleased to be here. So.
And thank you, Anne, for being here. We really appreciate it. And all the attendees for being with us this evening, too.
Yeah.
Be sure to join us for the NEA Big Read Door County keynote event tomorrow evening when we visit via Zoom with the author of Station 11, Emily St. John Mandel, at 7 p.m. And then keep enjoying the Big Read by attending a play reading with Doris Shakespeare performing selections from King Lear, A Midsummer's Night Dream, and Richard III on Friday, February 12th at 7 p.m. And you can find link information about how to access that by going to doorcountyreads.org for more information. You can also find your Zoom codes and more information at NEA Big Read Door County events at doorcountyreads.org or doorcountylibrary.org on the calendar. And finally, we value your opinion about our programming. So if you wouldn't mind going to our evaluation on doorcountyreads.org and filling that out, we'd really appreciate that. But thanks everyone for being here tonight. And Anne, great program. We appreciate it every time that you are virtually or in our
Yeah, I wish
location.
I was there. Next time for sure.
Yeah.
And M&M, I have to back you up on Fishing the Great Lakes. That's a really great book. And Titus, our fisheries specialist, would back you up. That he always mentions that when he talks about Great Lakes books. M&M added Fishing the Great Lakes by, I forget what the first name is. Boo. Not really sure. But that's also a really good one. Thank you guys.
Thanks everyone. We'll see
All
you
right,
at the
stay
rest of the Door
warm.
County Reads.